We were in executive session, now we're in open session, so we will continue the school board meeting. Dr. Dixon, we'll turn it over to you.
Yes. Thank you. And it's good to be in this beautiful facility tonight. I know the board, we wanted to move around a little bit, and we decided to use this venue for our data presentations for this work session and October's work session. So we're facing this direction so that we have a good view of the data, the presentation, and have a discussion. So similar to what we did this summer during our retreat. So, and also it's timely because we know we just had the release of our state report cards. And we also, again, wanted a larger venue for community members to come and engage and join us in this conversation tonight. So thank you to the community members who are here tonight to hear about the report card data and the work of Ed Services Department. So tonight, Allison Bird, our Director of Data and Assessment, is going to facilitate and lead this discussion.
Thank you very much. So, good evening. I'm pleased to have you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. I think
Yes,
we had a few items of
Yes.
business that we were going to take care of prior to
Thank you.
us getting into our data conversation, correct?
Correct.
Yes, we have one.
So if you don't mind, Ms. Bird.
Not at all, sir.
Okay. I'd like to go ahead and take care of the items that the board needs to vote on. And I don't know, Scott, what our situation is. Are these things going to be up on the board for people to see? Or how does our public know about this?
On the paper agendas have the items.
Okay, so they don't know anything about it, right?
No, they got agenda.
They're on the paper.
Oh, they got
agendas.
paper agenda.
Same as the old way there, buddy.
I got it. Okay, great. Then I think what we have, one is we have C1 through, where do we stop? 1 through 5, which is personnel. I'll accept a motion to approve the personnel items.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion, conversation? Questions? Okay, Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll?
Mr. Register,
Yes.
Mr. Posh,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Silverman,
Yes.
Ms. Wright.
Yes.
And now we can, so the motion passes, and now we can move into the work session. Sorry.
Oh, no apologies necessary. So, good evening, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you. As Dr. Dixon indicated, my name is Allison Bird, and I serve as the Director of Data Research and Assessment for the district. I've been in this position for 5 years, but have worked with the district in various roles for the last 19 years. And tonight I'm sharing the district performance on the 2017 Ohio State Report Card. So given the complexity of Ohio's accountability system and the state report card, the board members and the superintendent have very thoughtfully outlined a series of opportunities for the educational services team to keep the board and the public informed of the work we're engaging in and the data we're using to inform our decision making. So we began our discussion about student work in March of this year with the work session on the different types of, pardon me. Okay. So I apologize. So we began our discussions in March of 2017 with the work session on the different types of data we're using to guide our work. So we talked about external and internal data sources. So examples of external sources are state and national level tests, like the SAT, the ACT, and the Ohio State tests. And internal measures are those that are most closely connected to the work our students and teachers are engaged in on a daily basis. Now, we know that the internal measures have the greatest impact on increasing student achievement, because they're more frequent and immediately impact instructional planning at the school and classroom level. But tonight I'm going to share results from an external data source, the Ohio State tests. They are created outside of the school and district, they're scored outside of the school and district, and even though they're not as helpful in improving student performance, we do recognize that we need to know, understand, and clearly communicate our results and use the results for long-term district and school planning. In July, board members and, again, educational services team members participated in a retreat where we looked at state testing data, looked at preliminary report card results, and detailed progress to date on our strategic plan. We also discussed ways to put data in context by focusing on 3 questions. How did we perform compared to the goal? So what's passing? What's an A? How do I know if I did well? How did we perform compared to others? And how did we perform compared to ourselves? And that's looking at our trim performance over time. So now tonight, I'm going to do another brief overview of our Ohio State tests. We're going to look at 3 of the 6 report card components, compare the district performance to that of other districts in the state, Cuyahoga County and First Ring School Districts, and highlight key learnings and our 2017-2018 areas of focus. And just a note in case so I don't want to forget, when we're talking about comparing performance to First Ring districts, there are 16 First Ring districts, including Cleveland Heights, University Heights. So they are the school districts that border Cleveland Municipal School District. And so there are some both on the east side and the west side. When we talk about districts that are most similar to ours, we find that locally the First Ring districts are the ones that are most similar to ours. So our state tests. Students in grades 3 through high school are tested in English language arts and mathematics. As students take high school credit courses, the state tests that they take are course specific. So sometimes the tests are referred to as end of course exams. The end of course exams for high schoolers in English and mathematics are English 1, which is given in the 9th grade year, English 2, given in the 10th grade year, Algebra 1, and Geometry. In addition to math and ELA, students in grades 5 and 8 take a science state test. And high school students also have end of course exams in biology, American history, and American government. And they take those exams as they complete the courses in high school. Test results are provided in 3-digit scale scores and performance levels. So there are 5 different performance levels, with limited being the lowest and advanced being the highest. A score of 700 marks the proficient level. And sometimes the results are discussed in terms of passing or failing. So if students are proficient or higher, then we might describe them as passing the test or having met the goal or target performance. So most of Ohio State tests are administered in the spring of each school year. Districts select a testing window, which is the set of 15 days for English language arts testing, and then another 15 days for math, science, and social studies. High school end of course exams and the grade 3 English language arts tests are administered 3 times a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, and then an optional administration in the summer because of the high stakes involved for the students. Beginning last year, the State Department of Education required all 11th graders to take either the SAT or the ACT or the SAT. And students in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade are all given a reading diagnostic test. So it is easy to see based on all that we do a lot of testing and we may get overwhelmed, but there has been some progress. So just this year, the State Department of Education eliminated the math and reading diagnostics. So those were given in our early elementary grade, so it's nice to have those taken off of the plate. They also eliminated the state social studies test in grades 4 and 6. They've given our kindergarten teachers more time to administer the required kindergarten assessment. So before they had to have it completed by the end of September, and now they have through November 1st. They released item analysis for the 2016-2017 state tests. And it's important to note this because they haven't done that, they being the state, haven't done that in several years. And it is one way for classroom teachers to be able to put the state test results to use. So the item analysis allows them to see how did students perform on individual test questions to know what they might need to work on for their current year. And then the state also expanded graduation options for the class of 2018, so these are our current seniors, to include non-testing measures.
Allison, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No
but
worries.
the item analysis is student by student or just as groups or?
It is available both ways, so we can look at individual student reports, and it breaks it down by what they call reporting categories, and the questions tested within those. We can look at it from grade level performance, so all of the 8th grade students performing on the 8th grade science test, and teachers can see it from their classroom level. So if I worked with 25 4th graders last year on the mathematics test, I can see how the students I worked with responded on the questions.
But you could literally work with a student on particular problems they had a problem with.
You can work on
If you so to
on the standards, so they don't give us the exact question, but I know what was tested. So they give me the detail behind the question, not the
Okay,
question
I
itself.
understand better. Okay, thank you.
Well, we're still a year behind, right? If you look at the item analysis for the 8th graders this year, I mean, the results you just got, those are now 9th graders.
Correct.
So we take that, how do we use that information?
So in the way that's described, so I'm Allison Bird. I took the 8th grade math test last year. I'm now in the 9th grade Algebra 1 class with Mr. Posh. So Mr. Posh can pull up my math grade 8 report, and he can see how I performed on the various strands, so how I did in operations and algebraic thinking. So he's able to say, well, I did really well on representing numbers in multiple ways, but I need some help in addition and subtraction. I'm really oversimplifying it here. So he might provide me with additional support in one area before he begins teaching me how to solve equations. So even though the information is based on last year's test, we can use it in our current settings because what it basically tells us is how we responded, what we know with respect to our existing
And we
standards.
think that the question, I think, one Cal asked about, are we talking cohorts or are we talking individuals? So we are using this at the individual level as well as cohort levels.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, I actually participated in the high school math teacher-based team meeting. So all of the math teachers actually meet in one room, and then they break up into smaller groups where the Algebra 1 teachers talk together, the geometry teachers talk together, and I actually sat with the Algebra 1 teachers and we pulled up their reports. So we started looking at individual kids, and then we took a step back to say, okay, so let's look at it again from a broader level just to make sure that we're not missing anything. So we literally just walked through that, or I walked through that process with the Algebra 1 teachers and then the geometry teachers.
Okay.
So it is actionable. It is one of the things that makes the state test results much more usable because we get direct feedback about how students performed in specific areas.
Also, I'll just say one last thing, and I really promise I'll
No,
let you
you're
go
fine.
forward.
I like the questions.
I guess the other actionable, sort of a comment more than a question, the other actionable item I would think is that it allows you to see if there's any correlation between our internal testing and the external testing.
Absolutely, because we're taking the same steps of looking at our shorter, more frequent internal assessments and projects and tasks that we're asking kids to work on. They are also aligned to the standards, so just as you said it, and as we just showed when we met back in March, that we're able to make these connections. So how are we doing on these day-to-day assignments compared to what we're seeing on the high-stakes annual test?
Allison, I have a question too. So we have some conventional wisdom out there amongst some that feel that we have a lot of kids that sort of enter the district unprepared. So, and then we have kids that have been with the district that are very prepared. So this item analyses, does it help us either confirm or deny that fact, or maybe it doesn't matter because we need to focus on all kids?
Well, one of the characteristics of being a first-ring district is that we do have a higher rate of mobility or students moving in and out and between buildings within the district than others,
Yeah.
Say outside of that first ring. So it is something that we're aware of, but when it comes down to educating our kids, what we work to not do is separate them. We do look at their performance data, And if they need additional support or they need intervention, then we intervene. If they need to be enriched because they are performing at grade level or ahead, then we provide that. But I have not conducted an internal study in a very, very, very long time that disaggregates kids who have been in the district since, say, kindergarten and how they performed on the upper grade state test compared to those who may have been in or out.
Okay.
And I will also add, so we're going to actually look at 3 of the 6 report card components: gap closing, progress, and K-3 literacy. So it's going to give us some insight into how students are performing at the early elementary level, when they're just coming in, compared to their all students progress as in the upper grade. So not exactly the same thing that you're talking about, but we can see some differences in performance.
Okay. Thanks.
So this report card, the Ohio Department of Education prepares and publishes it. And the 2017 report card was just released last week on September 14th. The first the first component is called the gap closing component. And this measure is used to help us identify whether members of specific student groups are progressing towards the set goal, or AMO. And AMO stands for Annual Measurable Objectives. So for those of us who have been around longer than we might like to admit, we remember with the No Child Left Behind Education Act under the second Bush administration, we had annual yearly progress, or AYP. So this comes from federal legislation, or that Federal Education Act, and this is our new acronym.
I have a question, just for clarification's sake. When we're talking there's a gap between 2 cohorts. In this context, what are those 2 cohorts?
So I wouldn't describe it as cohorts. I would say we're looking at how students are, whether or not they are meeting a set goal or standard. So if they didn't meet the goal,
Okay.
so here they are. We look at 3 areas. We look at performance in English language arts, mathematics, and our graduation rate, and targets are set, or these AMOs. So for English language arts, we needed to show that 77% of our students were proficient or higher. When they aren't, then we look at the gap, and the gap is defined as, so what percent of the students were in fact proficient compared to the target?
So in this context, the gap is between all of our student population and the bar that has been set.
Yes.
Okay, because we talk about achievement gap in different contexts. That's why I wanted to, because when we saw gap achievement, we're talking all 612 districts in the state of Ohio. They all don't have the same achievement gap. So this is a gap between how we are and what the state says we should be.
Yes, and they address that in a couple of different ways. So when we talk about looking at performance for specific groups of students, we look at 10 groups in all. All students is the first group, right? So we look at the performance of all students. In addition to that, the data is disaggregated amongst other groups. So there are 6 based on race and ethnicity, whether or not students are economically disadvantaged, English learners, and students with disabilities. And again, the state and the federal government has defined those as our most vulnerable populations. So there's the initial measure of, how are students performing compared to the goal, and then how are individual student groups performing to see if we might be able to allocate more resources, or if there is a difference in how those students might be served.
Allison, can you go back? The economically disadvantaged, at one point we were looking at free reduced lunch statistics, I believe, for that, or at
Correct.
least that was some measure of
That is,
of
yes, that is the measure.
So we don't do that anymore.
So we no longer require families to complete those forms to indicate whether their income. And so you are correct. What we reported to the state for the 16-17 school year was that we are, and I apologize, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, a CEP district, meaning that all of our students should receive or can have free lunch and breakfast. It doesn't change the component. We still look at those students. So what you'll see in our graduation rate is because that is cohort-based and it's based on the class of 2016 performance, not last year's students' performance, there is still, that represents students who actually, whose families completed those forms and were designated as receiving free or reduced lunch by the federal designations.
But wouldn't that work against us, though? I mean, if all of a sudden we're sort of no longer having economically disadvantaged kids,
Well, we still have students who come from families with a range of income, so we still serve all of those people. As it relates to this particular measure, actually what happens is our all students measure is the same as our economically disadvantaged measure.
so 100% of, well, okay. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how do you know if someone's economically disadvantaged? And if you don't,
By declaring that, we have declared that all our students are economically disadvantaged.
okay,
So
that's,
the universe of all students in economic disadvantage is the same universe, it's the same population.
okay.
Right, so this is how the component is displayed on the report card. So you can see the three measured areas, English language arts, followed by mathematics, and then the graduation rate. The student groups are represented by the colored bars, and the annual measurable objectives are indicated with a vertical red line. So again, Eric, going back to your question about what is the goal, what are we measuring to? We're looking at whether or not the student group meets or crosses over that red vertical line. So you're only able to answer the first question about how each student group performed compared to the goal. If a student group, again, meets or exceeds that red line or goes past that red line and they've met the goal. So white students, that's the group represented by the blue bar, met the AMO in all three areas. And all students, under the graduation rate chart, they also met the graduation goal. But that's all you're going to be able to determine from looking at the report card from this view. When we look at district performance on the gap closing measure for the last 2 years, so looking or putting the information in context of how did we perform over time, we're able to see a little bit more. So the district's gap closing performance in English language arts improved in 8 of our 9 student groups. When we look at math performance across the district, 7 of our 9 student groups measured showed improvement from last year. And in our graduation rate, we met the goal or showed improvement in all but 1 of the student groups included in the calculation. When it gets to the third question of how did we perform compared to others, this is where we can look at other districts in the state and Cuyahoga County in our first ring district. So the way that you're going to read this, we earned an F in the gap closing component. And so did almost 50% of the other school districts in the state. When we drill down to those districts that are closer to us within Cuyahoga County, we can see that 55% earned the same score. And in first ring school districts, all but 1 earned the same score, and they earned a C.
Who's that?
That is Cuyahoga Heights.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask, is by definition, you're including, so Cuyahoga Heights is included as a first ring, and Euclid, Parma, and Lakewood would also be considered first ring suburbs.
Yes,
correct?
they are also included in that.
Okay, so just, I want to make sure I'm interpreting this right.
Okay.
We are in the 48th percentile of this.
No, it's not a ranking. So 48% of the Ohio school districts earned the grade of F. It's not a percentile ranking, because a percentile ranking would be different in that
Okay.
we're saying that we did better than 48% of the other districts, and that's not the comparison. So it is different from that idea of rank ordering. It's looking at just comparing the actual rating across the districts.
Okay, so literally 48% of all school districts in the state have an F rating in the gap analysis.
That is correct.
Okay,
And 94%.
and we're one of them.
Yes, we are one of
We're
them.
in that
We are
48.
included in each one of those columns, yes.
Okay,
And so again, the idea, connecting it back to our previous conversations, is how do we put this information in context? looking at how other districts performed can help us do that.
Allison, the first string districts, just so I understand the column, that's first string in Cuyahoga County or first string in Ohio?
First ring of Cleveland Municipal School District. So those are 16 school districts, including Cleveland Heights. So as Eric indicated, I can go through those if you.
No, that's all right. That's
So Shaker is one of the first string districts as well.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And an argument could be made that Cuyahoga Heights is an anomaly when you look at the overall group of entering suburbs, in my opinion.
Well, and again, the reason that they were targeted, and I bring the comparison in for all of the components that we're going to look at, because again, it's a way for us to understand how our performance compares to others, and is this good or bad? Are we on the right track? Are other districts finding success in these components? Are other districts struggling in these components? It's just one more way to help us understand it.
Okay, so one of the things that was explained to us in our board retreat is the state keeps on moving the bar.
So with the annual measurable objectives, we saw that the targets, yes, are different for each of the three groups or each of the three measured areas, and that those have increased each year. Because the Education Act was recently reauthorized, and Ohio just submitted their plan, I believe it was yesterday or the 15th, I believe that was the day. We don't have new targets for 2017, 2018, or the next couple of years. We have to wait until the State Department of Education gets their plan approved by the federal government, and then we can identify what the next set of targets are. But yes, over the years, the targets have increased as we've gone forward.
Okay, but when only 1% of the districts in the state are getting an A,
Again,
I mean,
the three questions are then very helpful in helping us understand how it all fits together. There is a component, I can provide for you the names of our state representatives who are a part of the education committee. Part of being able to advocate for schools and the students that we serve is being aware of what it looks like across the state and in different ways, because we know that the information is published. We see rankings. I have not yet seen it displayed in this way. I think it just kind of depends on the approach that we're taking on it.
Jim, are you implying that only 1% of all 612 systems getting an A is indicative of a test that doesn't seem to be realistic in its expectations?
well, okay, without sort of like sugarcoating the fact that we need to do better. Okay, I think we all know that we all need to do better. And I think just not Cleveland Heights, but everybody, okay, especially the inner ring districts. But when we have a test where only 1% of the people, the districts, are getting an A, something smells. And we know that there's a lot of politics behind this. And we can't blame politics. But these things are being used on a punitive measure against us, though, on how charter schools are funded. Something just doesn't seem fair.
It's not.
Well, we know it's not, but
And so for our focus, for the educational services team, we know that these are measures that we're being, graded on, and it does represent us teaching our state-adopted standards. So, when it's all said and done, or actually the purpose of our meeting back in March was to look at external measures and internal measures. So this is an external measure. It's one of many that we look at to define ourselves and to identify how well we're performing and how well our students are performing. But as I indicated, it is one that we do need to be able to, we need to understand it, we need to clearly communicate it, and we have to work with it while it's in place.
Since you mentioned external versus internal, and I know earlier you referenced, ACT, SAT, the question I would pose then in that regard is, when we look at non-state of Ohio ODE metrics, because I'm not a fan of pretty much anything from Columbus, how do we look when we look at SAT, ACT, more empirical, all 50 states versus our friends in Columbus? How do we look on those charts? I don't know, obviously it's not in your presentation. I'd be very curious to see that data, because to me, that's much more of a universal. It is outside the realm of politics. It's more, maybe a little bit more corporate, but it's outside the realm of politics. So I'd be curious to see how we look compared to, again, these criteria as well as this nation as a whole. I think that data would be of value, because I know we're always talking about identifying there's advocacy more than just a score. Well, I'm looking for some scores where we're actually looking decent.
Okay. Well, thank you for the heads up. So, as Dr. Dixon indicated, this is a two-part session, and we can actually see some of those national measures included in our Prepared for Success measure. So on October 17th, we'll look at the remaining three, Prepared for Success being one of them, and I can look to bring some of that information in as well. So the second component is the progress component, also referred to as the value added measure. And progress looks at growth that students are making based on their past testing performances. Previously, it was only based on state test results in English, language arts, and mathematics in grades 4 through 8. Now, high school state tests are also included, as well as grade 5 and grade 8 science. There are 4 measures within the component, looking at progress for all students in the school together. So the same way we saw all students represented in the gap closing measure, we look at this performance of all students in progress. We also look at performance for gifted students, students with disabilities, and progress for students whose test performance is in the lowest 20% of the students statewide. So what does the letter grade represent? If students meet the expected growth, then the school or district earns a letter grade of C. If they make more than expected growth, then the school or district earns an A or a B, depending on the amount. And if less than expected growth was made, that results in a D or F for the school or district. And the department has changed the look of this component. There used to be numbers that went along with it, but they've changed it to do the color rating. So this is what the component looks like on our report card. So historically, this has been an area where Cleveland Heights University Heights has received all A's. In 2015-16 was when we saw our performance flip from all A's to F's. And there was a great deal of discussion about the reasons why. So this was after the state changed vendors from PARC to AIR. Students were required to take the assessments online when they hadn't had enough practice using that format. So when we look at performance again this year, our results do indicate that students are performing below their predicted or expected levels. And I do believe that the lack of practice with online testing, the shifting between multiple tests is still impacting our performance. And that's why we see some of what we're seeing.
Well, this goes to, I think, Jim's comment earlier in regard to the, from previous data analysis that said the longer you were in the system, the better you were doing, which would synchronize with our previous A's. So I'd be very curious to see longitudinally with a new vendor and more criteria, if we get back to the A, or once we get back to an A, then they'll change the vendor and the methodology, and it'll be inverse again.
And we'll keep working towards it, right? And so right now, actually last week, the educational services team members and I held grade level team meetings with all of our elementary staff. And we got to meet with all teachers from kindergarten through 5th grade. And we actually went through, they got to choose between four different stations that they wanted to get more information about. And one of them was on our assessment warehousing system. And we were able to talk about the things that they were seeing with kids and their ability to navigate the computers and enter their responses online. So they are truly a set of skills that need to be taught and developed. So as we get better with that practice, we definitely will improve. When we look at our performance compared to others, we can see, again, districts across the state in Cuyahoga County and first ring districts.
Hey, Allison,
Yes, sir.
can you go back? Okay, so I know we have a lot of kids, especially in the early age, that really have never been exposed to computers before, so then they're forced to take a test on a computer, and it's really hard. Whereas maybe if you weren't economically disadvantaged and you had computers in your house and you were familiar with how, for example, a mouse works, it's a lot easier. So if you took that out of the equation, I mean, where do you think we would fall in this? Or is that just really impossible to?
I think it's
discern?
challenging for me to answer that honestly because I haven't done any research on it. What we know in terms of our students' access to technology is that regardless of their socioeconomic status, they have access to technology and they use it in different ways. And so what we're seeing is it is transferring how I use technology in non-school functions or matters, right? And translating that into what it means to type or write out an essay. How do I write out a mathematics equation on the computer when I'm used to writing it out on paper? I happen to be taking an online course and I find it I have multiple degrees and I find it very difficult to only respond online. Again, these are skills that need to be taught regardless of one's socioeconomic status. It's about comfort level, it's about the way that we have been the way that we've practiced, and there is an adjustment.
Okay.
Our third component is the K-3 literacy component. And this looks at how successful schools are at getting struggling readers on track to proficiency using results from a reading diagnostic test and the Grade 3 English Language Arts state test. So K-3 literacy looks at student performance over a 1-year period. At the beginning of the school year, districts administer their reading diagnostic and determine their reading status. So the status is that students are either on track or not on track. If students are not on track, they receive individualized supports in addition to the core curriculum over the course of the year, Then students are tested again at the beginning of the school year to see what their status is. In Cleveland Heights University Heights, we use a test called Dibble's Next as our reading diagnostic. So it's important to note that the district gets to select the reading diagnostic test, and for the reasons that we've already stated. It's not created by our district staff, but it's the closest thing to an internal assessment that we're able to use for these high-stakes measures. And we were using doubles in the district before it was part of the report card rating. So what that means is our teachers understand how to administer it, the results are immediately available, they're able to interpret the results, and most importantly, they know what actions to take once they've finished testing students. So this is what it looks like on the report card, and this is another component that the state has changed. This is not how it looks or how it looked in previous years. So again, it looks at the number of students not on track at the start of the 2015-2016 school year who improved to on track by the next year. So the way that you read it, I read it right to left. And you see the big division symbol there? So what that tells us is in 2015, we had 311 students who were not on track. Teachers worked with them over the year. Beginning in 2016, 2017, they were tested again, and we were able to move 50% of those students, or 156 students, to an on-track status.
So again, Allison, just doing the math a bit, it's the exact same 311 students. It's not, we're not just taking an aggregate number and saying 156. And so what happens if students leave, students come,
So in order to be included in the component, they have to have both measures. So if I was not here as a kindergartner when the first diagnostic test was given, but I was here I came in, let's say in February, and I took the test as a first grader, I would not be included in that measure because I was not one of the original 311 students who were
So
on
the
track.
311 is determined after the fact. You have the number of students who can be part of the, I'm going to say cohort, that's the wrong word, but of the cohort, that's the number that normalizes it.
That is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, what really irks me about this is when you look at what a B is equal to, it's basically a 49.3 to a 74.6%. And pretty much everybody that's used to what a B is usually thinks it's something in the 80s.
We'll get there.
I mean, it's,
So, but I think that's why it's important to understand how the measure is calculated and what it represents. Because again, one of the misconceptions is that if you just look at it and you don't have an understanding of the component, one might interpret it to say, well, only 50% of our elementary students are on track, and that's not what it's saying. It's saying we're taking the most struggling readers, and within a year, we're able to move them from not being on track or not being performing at grade level to now being on track. And it's also important to note that that's on track for their current grade level, not the test that they took last year. So the test does change depending on the student's currently enrolled grade level. So it is difficult work. It is not easy to fill those gaps, to use one of the expressions. So the fact that we have moved half of those kids who were not at grade level when they first come in, again, these are our itty bitties, these are our kindergartners, our first graders, and our second graders. That range is really saying, we're just able to move half or more of their kids who were originally not on track. Is it misleading? Yes, because the intention of the letter grade is to connect it to something that everybody knows and is most familiar with. So one would think that it represents 80%, but it does not. And when you better understand the component, I think it makes it clearer as to why we have that spread for that particular letter.
well, it's crazy misleading. But then when you really look at the expectation, though, is you want to have 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10 of your kids to be on track, okay? I mean, I would say 50% on track, which is what we have here, isn't acceptable, okay? But on the surface of looking at the number, but then again, really, I'm now wondering, what does on track mean if the score is as skewed as this?
So a couple of things. It doesn't mean that only 50% of our students are on track. We actually, in the 2015 school year, served 1,100 students in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade.
Okay.
So it looks at those 1,100 students who were in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade in the 2015-2016 school year. 311 of them were off track. Then when we get to 2016-17, about 150 of the still 1,100 students were not on track.
Yeah, but when you look at that 50% number, and maybe I'm not so smart, maybe I am, I guess it doesn't matter, but I look at that 50%, it basically is, I'm interpreting this just on the surface, 50% of our kids are not on track.
So that's why it's important that we have conversations like this, so that when we're asked, what does this measure mean? Or when someone is angry and they're telling you that this is absurd, you're only getting 50% of your youngest learners on track to reading, we're able to correct that misinformation, because that's not what it represents.
So like Jim, it would appear again that what you're saying then is that the state's reporting methodology and criteria is very, I don't want to say open to interpretation, but it's very fluid and very confusing as to what it's actually measuring, which one could argue undermines the entire value and legitimacy of the state report card.
Well, it does, but I think as a board member, a parent, a concerned citizen, when I'm measuring, what I really want to know, if you can go back for just 1 sec, is that 311 versus the 156, but taken in context of we have several thousand,
Right.
1,000, whatever the number is.
Based on our
just mentioned.
quarter
Okay.
one enrollment, 1,105 students in kindergarten through first grade.
Okay, and those kids are on track, okay? And we are just talking about a subset of 311, and of those, we got them to,
And of those, we moved half of them on track within
well,
a year's time.
If I'm looking at the data, I see something even more disconcerting. And that is, it looks like if somebody's in kindergarten, we do a really good job with them. We do a good job with the first graders. But when we get to the second and third graders, we don't do so good. According to these bars, if I see those bars correctly.
Well, it speaks to that it becomes more difficult, right? As students get older and they are off track, it does become more difficult to get them on track. So it's not necessarily that they've moved in and out, right? Or that performance is due to their transiency. But as kids grow, and the gaps of understanding or what they've been exposed to increases, it does make it more challenging for us to get them on to grade level.
Actually, I would actually say that an argument could be made that from data you shared with me previously, was only around 35% of our graduating seniors are K through 12, which turns into an annualized rate of around 8% per year. The reality, I think, what this data actually may show is that, which goes to the analysis Jim had mentioned previously, was that the longer you're with us, the better you do. The problem you have is that if you start with us in kindergarten, by the third or fourth year, based upon an 8% rate of transition, we've theoretically lost 10 or 20% of those students who start with us in kindergarten. So now we're, to a degree, playing catch up if the students are coming in unprepared. Now the flip side is that, going to Jim's point at 90%, if you had 1,100 some odd students in the cohort, and 311 were off track, and 156 were moved on track, that would leave us with that 90% number that you were looking for. I put two things together at one, but
I'm sorry.
no, but now going to the next one, I think this chart, I was getting to this, is when we look at, we're doing a B, which it's a skewed B. However, even that skewed B, we're doing pretty well compared to the different systems.
We are the only first grade district that earned a score of B for this measure. So again, when we think about populations that we served and the different challenges and being a first ring suburb, it speaks to the work that our teachers are doing.
I think this data validates the fact that you're here early and we work with you, you have the potential for real strong success. I think it goes to other issues, which is different from a more of a board and political perspective versus an educator perspective.
Well, there's probably a lot of conversation to be had here. I guess Beverly is the only one of us that's an educator, huh? But it also could speak, you spoke about a particular assessment tool that the district is familiar with and has used. Is that?
That is correct. So the districts get to select their reading diagnostic test, and we've been using Dibble's Next for several years. And I bring that to our attention because, again, it's the closest thing to an internal assessment that we're able to use that connects to the report card measure. So they're highly trained on it. They understand how to read the results. They administer the tests. They know how to intervene if students are not on track. Part of the process for the K3 measure, and it's tied to the third grade reading guarantee, is that when students are not on track, they're provided with an individualized plan, so a reading improvement and monitoring plan. So our teacher teams work on those together, and they provide them for each one of the students who are in need of it, and again, they monitor their progress over time.
So I don't want to present too radical a point here, but this is a single data point, right? So before we jump to too many conclusions and too many explanations and all, I think it's a dangerous road we're hoeing when we start doing that. I think there's obviously the desire to explain. I guess, and I think you're going to get to this at some point, whether today or in the next session or whatever. But I guess I'm sort of interested in how our educational team wants to use the data, and not just this data, the internal and the external together to create a unified plan that addresses the needs of all of our students. And that's what I guess I'm most interested in, less in looking at, again, I think even if I take the example you just used, if we've been doing dibbles in the district, then that means there's familiarity, possibly even in the student population, with that type of testing, which could also change the nature of how a student reacts to testing they've seen before, something that's familiar. It becomes it muddies the waters of how to analyze data. Okay. So I mean, again, I guess if we're going to be the 21st century problem solvers, that apparently history before the 21st century never had any problem solvers apparently, but and we're going to do all this critical thinking, then I think we as a team, as both the board and as staff, need to use that same sort of critical reasoning of how do we not try to explain data always, but much more leverage data to help our entire student body.
We will do that. So we have reviewed the 3 different components, and this is the part where I tell you about all the new initiatives and all the new programs that we're starting to improve our performance. And it really is the best part because we're not doing anything in that vein. So nothing new, no new programs, no new initiatives. What we are focused on is doing the right work, our current work, even better. We have a plan. We're now in year 3 of our 5-year strategic plan, and we are on the right track. I will take a couple of minutes to highlight 2 key pieces that we do believe, so not with the level of specificity that Cal, you're asking for right now, but
Yeah,
there are 2 key pieces that we know make it easier for everybody to do the right thing. The first one are the adoption and the implementation of common curricular tools in English language arts, mathematics, and science. And then later this year, our team will come to you with recommendations for social studies and world language tools. So we're increasing the number of students who have access to the core tools and providing more supports within the classrooms. So this shift is going to help all of our students, but students with disabilities and our EL students or our English learners will benefit greatly by having more time working and learning with their grade level peers. So we are staying the course. These are the tools that we're using. And again, I referenced earlier, last week the team and I, are back there in the audience, met with all of our elementary school teachers. Every week our high school teachers participate in their teacher-based teams. We were all here to support teacher efforts during that time. Over the last 2 days, members of our building leadership team have been working on their school plans for how they're putting the data to use. So absolutely, we will talk about that more in depth and provide examples during our October 17th meeting. And I think I got excited and I even talked through my next slide, and that is our focus on instruction, right? We have, through the Ohio improvement process, a structure that is working for us, right? It allows us to thoughtfully and purposefully review student performance data. We can identify instructional strategies, and we can provide feedback, and that goes both ways. So it's not just people at the central office level giving feedback or telling buildings or principals what to do, or principals telling teachers what to do. It is truly constructive feedback about what we see that's working and what we need to improve upon.
Allison, just because other people watch this, and I did
Yes,
this
sir.
when we did this before, those 3 items, the TBT, they sound like the first 3 items on the Sliman's menu. What are they?
I was doing so good in trying to work through my acronyms. So OIP stands for the Ohio Improvement Process. And then the other 3 acronyms are teacher-based teams. So that just refers, another way to think about it is our grade level team. We have our building leadership team. So it is the principal along with teacher leaders from the building who help make decisions and build their school improvement plans around 3 areas. So instruction, assessment, and school climate. And then our district leadership team. So again, it's all of those groups coming together to share practices and to highlight what is working and what we need to change.
Thanks.
So Allison, this isn't directed to you, this is directed toward the district. Even though you're sitting up there and you're sort
I'll
of
try not to
mentoring
take it
us here and
personally.
proctoring us. But, I mean, the issue here is staying the course. There's people in the community that will look at this report card and they're gonna say, you can't stay the course. If you're not getting A's, that's not good enough. I pay high taxes, I expect everybody to get an A. Now, we all know, because maybe we sent our kids here and we know that they got an excellent education, even in a building that was marked as a failing building. We all have our little excuses. We were walking around this building with the 4,000 to 5,000 people that were walking around for the open house. And one family basically said, well, we don't even look at the test scores anymore because they're meaningless. We can't say that as a board, but we have to have some kind of reaction to this. But it can't be defensive either, because then we look like a bunch of schmucks. I think the way that you've actually sort of put this in context is very, very helpful. But we do need to have assurances that we're working on ways of improving this, not necessarily staying the course.
Agreed, and I think also that when we talked about our board retreat, what are some things that we can do in our board meetings to show the community that we are invested too, that we're visiting our classrooms. I know Cal visited Noble this week. So last week. So we want to make sure that the community knows that everyone is invested and everyone understands what we expect our students to know, and that and we're giving our teachers the resources. We have a dynamic educational services team. They are in the buildings. They're assisting teachers. They're giving them the resources for our students. And what I love about the district is there are no limits to the resources that we give to our teachers and our students. So I think us having that ongoing conversation about what that is and what we're seeing and how we can help is something I think will be fruitful for us. Yeah, these test scores, it is what it is. Yes, we recognize that we may not be getting the results that we want to get, but we're working hard every day and we're improving the work. As Allison stated, this is the right work. So I think making sure that we are changing our conversations about what that work is and how we could be more engaged in that work is going to be fruitful, I think, for the community.
Well, this session is clearly very educational, and when we were initially presented this in the retreat, I think we all turned around and we said, hey, look, we need to find a way of getting this out as quickly as possible, because an A isn't necessarily an A, and I think people need to look at what is behind these numbers, and you've done a very good job in the retreat and again tonight articulating that.
Thank you, sir, I appreciate it.
Just one quick thing. It seems to me that we still need to have something that's maybe easier to digest to help us measure performance, and to make sure that, yes, we do need to stay the course and we are doing the right thing. And maybe not looking at the external measurements, but we look more at the internal measurements. Some of the numbers that are packed into, especially the K through 3 numbers, I think can be easily done. I know that there is more testing, and I know there's people out there that are very anti-testing. And the response I got back from the district is, we're not teaching to the test, we're teaching to the standard, which I think is genius and brilliant, and I think that's a great way to frame the work that's being done. But examples of that. another work session when we're focusing on this.
Yeah.
I love the fact that we've got board docs, and hopefully we can do what they call a condensed agenda. So all the routine stuff that we're always going to be voting yes for typically, we still do. We have the transparency of seeing when it's out there, people see what we're doing, but we're spending our time on this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, I think this is brilliant.
Yeah. And that's why we divided it up this way, so the next work session in October, we're getting into more of the internal, what's happening in the classrooms, what you'll be seeing, and so it was purposely done this way, so we can get this out of the way, because we know the report cards were released. We wanted the community to understand that we recognize where we are, but these are some things that we have in place and how we're measuring those, so. I'm pleased. Thank you again, Allison, and Ed Services team. They're doing
Yes, please thank my
Ed
team. This was
Services
not
team
an
back there. They're
individual
doing a
effort. We
nice-
all worked
They're
together.
doing a nice job.
Yes. Thank you very much. Any other comments? You, Cal, you seem to,
The November meeting before we adjourn.
okay, wait. Say that again?
About the November meeting before we adjourn, we'll change the November.
Yeah, have we sent notices out already? So nobody has it on their calendar. I think that we should go ahead and acknowledge that we have a meeting on Monday. I'm not sure.
That notice has gone out.
Those notices have gone out. We have a joint meeting with the city of Cleveland Heights on Monday, and that meeting is
6 PM at City Hall.
6 PM at City Hall. So that's coming up. And I think the November meeting, we're making some adjustments on that meeting. I guess normally that meeting probably would have been November 22nd, I believe, but it's gonna be on the 15th. And those notices haven't gone out, but if you normally track us by us having some consistency, we're gonna break that mold in November.
And also, the first meeting will be on the Monday as opposed to Tuesday, because Tuesday's election day, correct?
That's, yes. I think it's.
I'm not sure. We will look and confirm that and put in your weekly report.
So are we reworking the November meeting because of the Capitol Conference,
No,
or just conflicts?
we have some conflicts that,
Okay.
so what, we're gonna be going to the Capitol Conference and coming back and having that meeting maybe between here and Columbus somewhere.
So we should just say October, we know November's in flux.
Well, it's not exactly in flux. We've about nailed it down that it would end up being on the 15th. And we'll send some notices out on that. And at this point, I didn't get any indication that anybody had any conflict with that. I guess the only other thing is that we should say a little bit about what's happening Sunday, right? Dr. Dixon, do you want to say something about Sunday?
So we have the Heights Community Congress, their home tour in the Heights. I will be one of the sites, so from 2 to 4 p.m. We'll be open, and we'll be showcasing a few of the rooms here.
3 spots, I think.
Is it a
3 spots,
refreshment
yeah.
spot?
The
I
main
don't
entry
think so,
foyer, the auditorium, and the front courtyard. And then we're also encouraging people to come back for homecoming weekend if you want to see more of the building.
Are the students doing it, or who's doing the tour?
I think Sunday is the Heights I think Heights HCC is doing it, I think the union or the stewards, or the chaperones, or whatever we want to call them, docents, on Sunday. And I assume for the one in October, that's probably going to be
Yes.
students or staff, something like that.
Is
So-
the October homecoming tours similar to the open house that we had?
I'm not sure if I can provide some more information in your weekly
I think
report
it's,
about what
I
those.
think it's more likely to be the self-guided first floor versus the whole building would be my
Well,
gut.
My guess too.
Yeah, well, that's probably good. I know a lot of people, once they heard from their friends about how great it was, it's like, oh my, I really missed it, I need to go. I think there's a lot more people in this community that really want to see this building. I don't, obviously, I don't think it needs to be as elaborate as the opening. And the self-guided tour is really very, very, very well put together.
I piggyback on Jim, I think we should be, we should be prepared for the advent that it is another, instead of it being a decent turnout, we should be prepared for a large turnout, just as the
Yeah.
CYA.
So, Mr. Wortman just sent me, and I apologize for being on my cell phone texting, my apologies. But we're expecting about 500 people, and it'll be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. the homecoming weekend, and the whole building will be
Oh, okay.
showcased.
10 a.m. to what?
10 a.m. to 12 noon,
On that Saturday?
Saturday, yes. Because remember, that parade is from, I think, it's 5 to 6 or 6 to 7. It's gonna be on Lee Road, so that parade is that evening,
5
and
to
then the
6.
game, 5 to 6. And then the Saturday, we have the tour.
Okay. Anything else?
I just want to say happy birthday to Alan Wilkinson, who's in the audience.
Happy birthday, Alan.
Hey, Alan.
Okay, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Okay, Mr. King?
Mr. Register,
Yes.
Mr. Posh,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Silver,
Yes.
Ms. Ray.
Yes.
Okay, we're adjourned.